Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Keep Kicking, the martial arts podcast, where I have martial conversations with my martial arts friends. Today is a little different because this I have labeled as the internal symposium of 2026, and we are going to be talking about internal arts exclusively, how they apply and enrich the external arts, but more importantly, how they enrich our lives or ourselves. So, I'm Paul, you know me. This is John with a G, everybody. And we're just going to take a minute, go around the room and express who we are in relation to this conversation. Chris, you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Chris Himmel. I'm from Great Bay Tai Chi in Salisbury, Massachusetts, and I teach Yang style Tai.
Very good. Rich?
Hi, I'm Rich Marantz. I live in southwestern Vermont, director instructor of Green Mountain Tai Chi, teaching Tai Chi, Qigong meditation, Taoist philosophy, do healing work, acupressure, and energy work as well. And work as make my living also as a holistic nurse as well.
Very, very cool. Stephen?
Hi, I'm Steve Watson of SomedayFarm.org. I'm in Connecticut and I teach philosophy, and that doesn't pay the bills. So I teach martial arts, which also doesn't pay the bills.
Brilliant. Last but not least, Nick?
Hi, I'm Nick Acri. I run Jainam Training Academy in Kingston, Pennsylvania, and teach primary Tung Soo as the martial art and Qigong along with that.
Very good. Okay, so recently I was up. I had the fortune of having a lesson physically with Steven, and we had a conversation, and he inadvertently said something that goes directly along with this. We were looking at one of the trees in his yard, and it hadn't bloomed yet, but the buds had started, and he expressed that he thinks of it as a kung fu journey, and this being defense and this being offense. And so then the conversation that we were going to have starts with, how does internal art inform our external practice of self-defense or self-preservation or fighting, as it were? So whoever wants to go can go.
Maybe I can ask a question.
Sure.
Because I'd love to know what everybody's definition of internal art versus external art would be, and what's the framework in which you want to have that conversation.
Usually it's if it can defeat Tang Soo Do, then it's internal.
You actually, the definition.
You know what? We joke about that so often, but I guess I'll just use my personal experience. In Tung Soo Do, I was taught that it's a blended art, right? So it's got the hard style of Japanese, and it's supposed to have that influence of Tai Chi and the Chinese martial arts. That's always, it's always dependent on the teacher, right? So all my instructors leading up to that point more leaned into the hard style. So I got more into the Qigong or Qigong, as we like to pronounce it the proper way, as a lot of you guys will say, not the Korean version. But I realized it helped that other stuff better, and then also be able to do it longer. I'm not I still have the aches and pains that we complain about, but they're not nearly as bad as what I see other people that don't have that kind of practice, that attention to that. I have to pay attention to what my body's doing at different stages of my.
I think for me, internal versus, I was going to make the joke that external is Kempo and internal is everything else. But I think for me, the internal becomes, because we all know hard style, soft style, but those are both kind of external. Soft style is still in an external capacity. But for me, the internal becomes listening to body, listening to self. If I extend that to a fighter, I extend it to somebody else, I'm now listening to them as I'm connected to them, or I am, listening to what they need versus, oh no, we lost Rich, versus listening to what they're doing, so to speak, because that's the difference. So
Rich has returned to the great Wu Ji. He's ascendant just from Nick's answer. Amazing.
Oh wow.
That's all.
Well, I think it's more like his bread has called him.
Yeah, I think that building on what Nick was saying, thinking about the healing aspects or the health maintenance aspects rather than just the what if I get in a fight kind of thing. One of the things that we practice in the internal arts is like everyday self-defense. Like,
Right.
how do I sit? How do I wash the dishes? How do I walk? How do I breathe? How do I, etc. And by the time I might have to physically defend myself, somebody grabs me or punches me or something like that, I'm so much more practiced at health preservation, self-awareness in all of my skills. So I think how the internal practices support the sort of overt and gross self-defense is that I'm practicing them every waking hour in how I prepare my food, how I read, how I talk, how I think, all these things, as opposed to maybe somebody who, let's say 4 nights a week spends 90 minutes, doing push-ups and pumse and so forth, which is great, but they might not be thinking about caring for their joints, caring for their muscle tissues, caring for their lung capacity, caring for their state of mind. So I always think that there's not a difference between the self-defense and the health. I just think there's acute self-defense and then there's, let's say, everyday chronic self-defense.
Yes.
And that's something I've been thinking about a lot too. It's like you can't do any of those self-defense things we talk about in the strange situations if you're not at that healthier point anyway,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of the times if you're taking care of yourself in those ways, those types of self-defense situations that we theorize is like hardcore nasty beat 'em up masters, you know what I mean? They're not going to happen because you're not going to go into those situations. You're going to have a clear, sound mind. You're going to be more relaxed. You're going to be enjoying the moments instead of waiting for that one moment that we train.
Yes. Great point. Great point. Yeah. I'm far less exposed to the dangers that as a younger man I would fantasize about, hope somebody tries this on me. I've been practicing this a lot. And then the reality is I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to get hurt. And even more, I don't want to be in those places. I don't want to be where people are yelling or stewing or fuming or sort of out of their presence, whether that's drug addled or angry or worked up in some way. I'm not happy in those. I'm not comfortable in those positions.
That leads really well toward Rich, though, right? Because he is also very much the same capacity as an emotional and spiritual being, but he works in a place where, the medical industry, he might come into someone who's just upset and yelling, or maybe somebody that has to deal with drug addiction and are, in some way
Or
not themselves.
existential angst
Well,
and pain.
violence. So I lost connection there for a minute, so I missed a little bit. But
All good.
I'll speak to that, and I just want to speak to the idea of internal martial art as opposed to the external too. My 2 cents on that, but yeah, I mean, violence shows in many ways, right? So violence comes at us not just through a physical punch. It comes at us through thought. It comes at us through words, and people perpetuate violence all the time on us, right? It doesn't always have to show physically. So we want to be prepared to neutralize violence however it is expressed, right? So, most times we're dealing with the violent nature of through words and thoughts. Very rarely do we deal with the violent nature through the physical, that's finally expressed through the physical. And then as far as the internal versus the external, the way I see it is that when you are, and I've done it, I practice, the external fighting arts, and, you're really just thinking of power, speed, muscle, structure, and that's where your thought is. And how much can you inflict damage and not get damaged, right? At least the training that I did. Whereas the
Right.
whereas the internal martial arts, what I've come to understand, and this is what I shared down at Chris's studio not long ago, is that we have to have the internal structure to create the environment. So it's not that we internal martial artists forget about the external. We need the external structure to create the environment so that the energy can flow, that everything can flow freely. And then through my work as particularly as a hospice nurse and seeing end of life, and then also my practices, my Taoist practices, recognizing that we are more than a physical being, right? We are both. We are form and formless. We are both. It is and both. It's not either or. So when we practice so-called internal arts, what we're doing is working with our formless internal being that then informs the physical. So if I strike, I'm not just doing a punch, it's the energy moving, and then with my intent, but I've practiced at moving this energy and in conjunction with creating a good structure and creating good environment. So we're both physically strong and physically healthy, but we're also healthy and strong in a way that can't be seen, right? Can't be seen. It's the form and formless that are working in conjunction with each other. It's not either or, it's both. And so that's the way I kind of see the applying our internal arts, even for self-defense, or I love your term, Paul, self-preservation. I love that term. That is a great term. I like that even, like I always called my programs, I didn't call them self-defense, I called them stay safe. Is what I call them, but I love the idea of self-preservation. But I think it's a misconception that internal martial artists are wet rags. You know, the people I've learned from had
Yes.
immense structure and they were so dynamic and so full of, physically they were really strong, right? And I heard a thing recently actually that if we don't make our bodies strong and you have all this energy, say from doing, as Nick calls it, Qigong, doing the Qigong, you have all this energy, then it has no container for it. You can't use it because you're this wet rag. So we want to have a strong body, a good structure, like it is in internal martial arts. But we also contain this river, that's this rushing river that runs through us that informs the physical. So this is the way that I see it and have experienced it.
I think that it's not just that we contain it, but we channel it, and some of it's contained, some of it's preserved, some of it's slowed, like a widening in a river. The river slows, or an irrigation canal coming off a river, or something like that. I think that when we think about self-defense, it's important to understand, like, well, what am I trying to defend, right? Not just how do I defend, or is there a fact of wanting to preserve the self, but what am I working to preserve? All of it? Or is there a bunch I can let go of? Whether that's jealousy or illusion or confusion or desire, all these sort of practices that are often recommended by the internal arts. And to build on what Rich was saying, or maybe offer a more expanded view on a section of what he said, I think it's really important to understand that when we say strength, we all just heard me say muscles, but I didn't use the word muscles, but it's what we heard. And we thought of strength as picking up a stone or swinging an axe for an hour or something like that. And that's a type of strength. But I think it's important to understand that in the internal arts, there is maybe a greater emphasis on alternative types of strength. So, or a more balanced spectrum of strengths, perhaps. And there's certainly people in the internal world that are more wet rags. And I think they're kind of missing a lot of what's on offer. And there are certainly people in the external world who aren't as strong as they think. And there are people in the external world that have great strength that we might call spiritual strength or emotional strength or psychological strength or what have you, strength of flexibility, let's say. But the emphasis that the internal arts places on a greater spectrum of strength so that we don't have that narrow sense of strength, meaning muscularly strong. Right. Like the great grandmother develops a strength that no other woman has. but she can't pick up a half gallon of milk. That's fair. She cannot climb 3 steps. Totally fair. But she has a strength that no other woman has, right? And we recognize that as a strength. And yet, when we say the word strength, we immediately picture a muscly firefighter, carrying somebody out of a burning building or something like that. Like we narrowly emphasize and boldface a certain type of strength, maybe as a society, maybe as martial artists, maybe as people who speak this language, or maybe in this time. But I think the Neja Chuan offers an opportunity for us to be continually reminded there are a great many strengths,
Can we go back to Chris now, since you took the question and geared us this way? Now you can answer the question.
Yeah, so I think that was really interesting, and I'm glad we kind of got that perspective, because as a room of martial artists, I don't want to limit the definition so much, and so when we hear that word, internal arts versus external arts, if we're gravitating toward internal martial arts and external martial arts, my sort of
Right.
working definition of the distinction is that the internal arts tend to start with refining body mechanics first and save all their power training for later, whereas the external arts would do the exact opposite, right? They start with a lot of power training up front and then eventually move into more of the refining body mechanics. But what I think I'm hearing from all of you is, if we're going to talk about internal arts, then we're really talking more about the self-cultivation aspects and the mindfulness aspects, which, I think is an important distinction for us to have as, if we're going to have this conversation.
That's helpful, yeah.
So
And it occurs to me that, the model of the external arts, if we're starting with, you're always at your youngest when you start martial artists. When you start martial arts, whatever your age is, it's your youngest age that you will be in the martial arts at. And I'm starting to think, like, if you do start with the external, when you have that capacity to work on the power stuff, if the art can cradle you and direct you in the direction of the internal as you age, you reach these points as you naturally begin to value them and need them and maybe depend on them. And just as you lose the other ones, maybe to some degree you lose them. Maybe there's a wisdom there that it's not my path, but it's a wisdom.
I think my take on the internal direct relationship, like any martial art in general, if we're making that separation, is that like the internal arts are helping me do what I love longer. And then if I extend that to natural, like a lot of the stuff that, like, when I think of just basic Qi that I work with, like the people that come in every day, it's really just movement exercises and calm breathing, and then to get them into a state of mind that if they were doing maybe 5 minutes a day of that and not scrolling on, you know what I mean? Those types of things, like natural human things that we would be doing all the time, but now we need an instruction manual on how to do it to actually enjoy the natural work. Like maybe this is part of my existential crisis of realization, is like we're trying, at least from my end of trying to get people to do martial arts and anything internal, is like, can we like experience the world through the world of us, rather than experiencing the world through the screen or through somebody else's eyes or through somebody else's opinion. And the more we lean into like these things that are beneficial for us, the better the world tends to. And you can't change some of the things, but at least your response to those things that you can't change works out a little bit.
I'm stealing that wording. Experience the world through the world of us is brilliant.
Yeah. I have very few farmers that find the need to study what I'm teaching, because they're doing it in their daily life. They are breathing and bending and twisting and stretching and all. And I might teach them some self-defense. Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Whereas the average kind of person of today, I need to, here's how you sit, here's how you stand, here's how you breathe, here's how you stretch. Like that's, I guess, like a lost skill, or being lost, or less common.
Well, there's a saying.
I mean, I'll admit, when I go through my scroll fits and I watch people, it's like they're screaming at you going, "Get off your butt, dummy." I'm like, I don't want to have to yell at people on my social media to come to karate class and try something physical out, besides looking at another recipe that you're not going to.
Well, they say,
or that workout that you thought was cool.
Well, that's
Sorry,
okay.
Rich. I'm just
no, that's okay. I'm cutting you off. You go ahead. No, there you brought up the idea. So there's a saying that it takes effort to become natural. And so our
See it on.
practice is the internal arts practice is about returning to our own nature. And so much, whether it's physical or emotional or spiritual or mental, is returning to our nature. So that's the practice, and it takes effort to do that. It's easy to follow the nature or the trajectory of our lives through whatever society deems us to live. But what we're looking to do is different, right? Through these practices, we're looking to return back to our original nature and not follow the constructs and the lessons of, society that they want us to learn, so to speak, that we all
Mhm.
have. I mean, we all have to, we've all done that, right? On some level. So yeah, so it takes
Mhm.
effort to to become natural. And that to me is what the practice of Tai Chi is all about, is returning back to our original nature. Whether
And to speak to that, like even in the student manuals that I've seen throughout all my training, become one with nature was like the ultimate goal of the martial artist. Well, I think, and for the first thing you have to remember to become one with nature, you have to remember you are nature. You're an animal, just like all the rest of. Just because we got these doesn't mean don't have to use the rest of the stuff that we were put on the planet.
Well, yeah, and one of the things that comes up we have a Taoism study group that meets that Stephen has been a guest at a couple of times.
Yeah, it's great.
And one of the things that's come up for us multiple times is this idea of the way that we perceive the world. And like Nick's kind of talking about, if you're just scrolling and you're experiencing the world through a phone, then you have this sort of artificial filter on there.
Mm.
But in the Taoism group, we talk a lot about the filters that we have in place already and how much our perspective, is colored by our previous experience. And so we talk about trying to learn to see the world as it is and not as our
Mhm.
brain tells us it is or as we think it is. And I think that's been a huge part of my Tai Chi practice. And I think, Tai Chi and the other internal arts really kind of help you get to that, right? Through all that kind of self-investigative work. And if you can start peeling filters away, the world looks different, right? It's not what you thought it was.
Absolutely. So, like, back to the bloom, the bud that hasn't bloomed yet, right? So the other part of this conversation is that it seems to me that internal arts have the ability to combat the thing that I am rubbed the most wrong way about in external arts. And that is that most masters that are external only, and we're using these as blanket terms, but it gets the point across. They walk around as this bud that hasn't bloomed yet. I am the strongest, I am the hardest, and I am the best. And it feel like it used to strike me as kind of egotistical until my own personal growth has allowed me to like see it for what it is, which is really just it's coming from a place of insecurity or fear or a lack of something, a lack of love, a lack of maybe understanding or being heard. But they're still defense and they haven't graduated in that capacity to offense in a proper way. And I wanted to talk about what it is that the internal arts have offered you all as individuals that allowed you to get to that point of there's a certain level of love and compassion that exists within the hitting and punching that doesn't exist for all of us. And that's something that it can't be really like understood until it's experienced. But if we could just take as many moments as we need to dissect that concept.
so
I mean, I'm sure we've all been around those types of masters that you speak of, and I think the eye-opening thing for me is that environment. It's almost like it was like a badge of honor. They
Yes.
walked around with
Yes.
their broken backs, they're hobbling with their bad knees, and some of them never, they've got their cane for cane purposes, not for self-defense purposes. And it's like this, I was hardcore back in my day, and look at how hardcore you should be now. And I go like, yeah, but I don't want to be hobbling when I'm your age. And then the other thing I think that bothered me a lot was like a lot of people that are the age that now when they were this age, like we're like, oh, just wait till you can't do that kick when or whatever. And why would I not want to do that kick when I'm your age? I'm going to figure it out because I enjoy doing that part, for now. And then so I'm just going to make that part of. So I knew there had to be a better way to go about my training as I went through seasons of life. So I think like those people you talk about were the eye openers for me to lean into it more, because it's in comparison to you guys, like I'm a baby in the internal arts. I haven't been practicing nearly as long as you have or have some of the same perspectives or as matured with it. I'm almost like the person that saw the alcoholic father and now he doesn't drink. Well, like, I saw the terribleness that can happen with all that hard training and that's it. I don't want to be, I would still want to be able to do my martial art into as long as I possibly can.
Well, where I
You
see,
sound very much like my teacher early on. He would say, I want to be able to feed myself. I want to be able to write a check. And, he's like, I'm not going to teach you iron palm stuff, for example. And it was very front of mind early, like day 2, it came up like, you need to be thinking about what's sustainable, not what's cool. And your ego is not going to latch onto what's sustainable. It's going to latch onto what puffs your chest out or seems strong or fun or cinematic, not what's functional and sustainable. And, maturity can shift what you value, but it helps to have good models to help you, expand the range of possibilities. So I feel like crying hearing Nick say that at his beautiful, innocent age, like, because it's like my teacher's passed. So it felt like very warm inside. So thanks.
so the word that comes up for me with this, that as you were talking, Paul, is, well, first off is we point the finger out. Oh, look at that man. I point the finger at myself always, right? And I did that too. I had that mindset too. So now to have the different mindset, I know internally what that feels like, the different mindset, not just by looking outward. But my teacher had said, so the word that came up for me with that is equilibrium. So what's missing when we're in that state of being that you're talking about with these masters, or that Nick was talking about, is a lack of equilibrium. They're only closed. They're only tight. They're single-minded in the way they're doing something. So there's no equilibrium. And I think of one of the most profound lessons I learned from my Tai Chi teacher. He said, if you don't understand open, close, gather, release, you will never understand Tai Chi. So, of course, I spent the last 20 years trying to understand open, close, gather, release. But really, this is what we're talking about. You're talking about the bloom. There's a time to pull inward, to gather. There's a time to open and release, right? And it's to offer, to receive. There's a time to push. There's a time to rest. It's understanding the equilibrium, that they're all part of the whole. And like Stephen was just saying, thinking of what is sustainable. Only doing things one way without that equilibrium or that yin yang aspect to it, the wholeness of yin yang, is not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. And it's not very fun, right? It's not enjoyable. Right. So that's the word that kept coming to me as you were talking about, bringing up the scenario, Paul, is the lack of equilibrium. Right. So to me, this is what it's about, is to have to find the internal art, to find this equilibrium, not only in the way we apply the art, the way we practice the art, the way that we live our lives. Right. All of these things. There's a time to joke around. There's time to be serious. Right. There's both. It's finding the appropriateness. One of the first lessons I ever learned about Taoism, the very first time I ever heard about Taoism, the guy that he was teaching about it said a really important word in Taoism philosophy is the word appropriateness. So there is an appropriate time for really pushing yourself. To never push yourself, then you end up the wet rag, right? But there's also to find the equilibrium with that, to be appropriate there as well, right?
And you suss out the appropriateness through Tingjin. right?
Yeah.
Like, what does this situation need? What is this missing? What is expected? What is the direction of things? And before your ego just drives you in a direction that was sort of preordained, you say, well, here are my resources. Here's what I sense is missing or needed, or how I can add to it, let's say. And then I generate an action or a non-action.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not just driven by my own intensity of intent.
Mm.
And, to speak to what you were talking about, Nick, my Kung Fu teacher, when I did external fighting arts, he used to say all the time, I'm taking care of my old age now. And I've kept that going to this day, even in my nursing and seeing people who are ill from not taking care of themselves through lifestyle. Right? That, not just through chance, but through lifestyle choices. I think, okay, again, point the finger at myself. What are the choices I'm making today so that I'm taking care of my old age now? Taking care of today, because today is like the best day of my life. I say that every single day. Today is this is the best day ever. Every single day I say that, right? But it's with the
I say that every day I see Rich too.
well, that's what I'm thinking, but so we're taking care of our old age now, and we're doing it through these methods, through these practices.
Yeah. So, kind of running back, I think, Paul, the way that you asked the question was, how are internal arts better at letting us let go of those insecurities and
Yes.
not have all
Yes.
that? And I think, that's kind of what internal arts focus on, is the letting go, right? Rich talked about the idea of the release, and we heard yin in there, as in yin yang. And I think, at least in Tai Chi, and I think, by extension, it's true in other arts as well, that focus on letting go as a beginner Tai Chi student starts very physical, but that becomes a mental, emotional, spiritual lesson, right? And so all of those things that we're holding on to, we kind of start to recognize and figure out, and that's a big lesson in Tai Chi. And I think,
Mhm.
we've already mentioned the wet rag a couple of times here, right? But Tai Chi focuses so much, at least in the beginning, on the yin side of things. And if you take that too far, you get the wet rag. But the yin side is what's missing from those people that are all bound up, right? In our society, in our culture, I think yang is the default, right? That's kind of the easy thing for us. And so part of what
Right.
makes Tai Chi so challenging, and other internal arts as well, is that focus on the yin, right? And the let go. And then we can eventually reach the equilibrium that I think Rich is talking
Right.
about. But if you
But we
go
might
too
we might
far, it's
reach
the
that
wet rag.
equilibrium and have the momentum carry us out of equilibrium.
Exactly.
And then become wet rags. So even if the default is fairly bound up and strength and tight, which I agree with you, that feels like most likely people are coming to me to study are going to need to be more yin. That's most likely what's going to happen. And so we emphasize that, but we want to also kind of educate them to not swing past that. And so if we see that progress as teachers, we might get excited. They're really relaxing a lot. They're really relaxing. Oh my God, and then wait a minute. They they can't take a punch, or they can't stand up for the form, or whatever it is. So I think that that's important. It has to be couched in what we're looking for is balance, and balance is a verb. It's not a state. Right. And there's
Gentlemen,
a lot of skills that support that verb, right? That we've
let's
all
speak
discussed.
more on release, because in wanting to do this conversation, I have a bit of an outline present, but I knew that this conversation would take a form of its own and would carry us in different directions. So I don't have a question, but let's speak more on release. John's here for release as well.
Well, hey, so thinking of that word, Paul, did you have a sign
Yes.
of release?
No, did not.
Think about that for a second, right? We have to sign a
Yeah.
release, which means to let go of let go of responsibility for the other person, for our lives, for our actions, right? So at the Tai Chi farm, Master Joe's Tai Chi farm, there was my favorite sign ever, 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 ever. And this may get off the track of what there's many ways we can talk about that word release, right? But my favorite sign ever is said, enter at your own risk and take full responsibility.
Oof.
Right? Is my
Yes.
favorite saying, except the other favorite sayings I have.
That seems like that would be a great refrigerator magnet.
Yeah.
You know,
that's the favorite saying for right now.
I think it needs to be
Yeah.
actually in maternity wards where babies are born,
Yes.
they come in and they say, enter at your own risk, take full responsibility. So what are we releasing, right? We're releasing what we're holding on to that takes us away from our responsibility in living our lives. Right? That's one way of looking at it. And maybe you guys
I can turn it a
on that.
different.
Yeah, please, because there's many ways.
Think about how what are we doing when we sign? Like, since you're using the analogy of like signing a release form, in a way, we're also giving permission. So when you're releasing that, you're giving permission in a number of ways. Are you giving yourself permission to be softer and more yin? Are you giving yourself permission to get rid of that emotion? So in a way, like sometimes we give words a negative connotation that don't need it. Like release doesn't necessarily mean that. So if you look at it as a way, we're also giving permission when we release.
I love that. I love that.
But what do we think the opposite of release is? For me, the word bound comes up.
See, I think I think gathering is the opposite, because releasing is an action going this way or downward, and gathering.
How about collecting?
Collecting
control.
And so I think maybe containing might be a helpful.
Containing,
right, or bounding, not binding, but creating bounds for something.
But again, we have to have that equilibrium. You can't release if you haven't drawn in, if there's nothing to release. The problem is that
I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. I think I can put holes in a bowl to make a colander before I run hot water through it. So the release has happened. There's no way to prove it yet because we don't have water. But like, does that make sense? Like, I can tell myself if Rich insults me during this podcast, I'm already okay with it, or turn the other cheek, or laugh, or make fun of him too. Like, you know what I mean? And if you never make fun of me, I could have sort of pre-released that. Like, I'm not that which will bound, or collect, or contain, or gather. Does that make sense? So I think that's possible. Like, I think I can have a release that doesn't get tested, but I'm still prepared to. I'm lubricated. I'm ready to turn that way. If you kicked me there, you just never kicked me there during the sparring match, but I was released that way. You just kept kicking me with your left pea joggy, so I kept blocking over there.
That was the terrible kick that at All In Weekend.
Oh, the pea joggy?
Yes, the diagonal.
I love that. I love that kick.
In American Kempo, that's an inverted roundhouse kick, and that's a good kick for me.
I enjoy, but for various reasons, but not to mention that.
Right. Back to release. And the biggest question that we've heard multitude of students or people that we're talking to release about, and that is how.
Can I add another thought on release? Because we paused
Please.
to talk about Pichagi, and I know you're going somewhere else, but I'm thinking release, whatever the mechanics are, which we're about to get into. I think ultimately release is admitting that you don't control. Right? So it's the act of admission that I never controlled, whatever I purported to control.
Do you think admission to self is important, but do you think admission is important as just sitting with and recognizing?
Yeah, so admission is, awakening, awareness, recognition, clarification, lack of illusion. It doesn't have to be stated. That's just a
yes
particular term I chose, but I chose it because it suggests a failure to recognize previous to that. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So you want to talk about the mechanics of release?
The how.
Are you talking about emotional or physical or psychosocial or spiritual or muscle?
It has been my experience that in my walk on this earth, the Paul Coffey view of things, or as Nick gave me, in the world of me, that everything starts with that spiritual and emotional level and connection. If I have a physical thing that needs to be released, there's an emotional or a mental or a spiritual thing attached to that. But if I get the shoulder moving really well, I can get 75 or 80% there, but I can't get this 100% clear if I'm not sitting with and being honest with what's here and then evolving or releasing that, right? And so it feels like the answer to the question of what we're talking about is a spiritual or an emotional release. You know, like we talked about those masters who walk around like this. Well, they walk around like this because what's the alternative? They have to be fallible to their students.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm fallible to my students, then I'm not the best, and they may
The
go
house of
down the
cards comes
street.
down.
They may go down the street to who's the best, and then my business crumbles and my livelihood, and like then they do that spiral. But
Self-identity.
yes, it's really attached to all of those internal things. And so the internal symposium of 2026 is about teaching people how martial art, how it sort of cleanses the soul. It helps us release, it helps us wash out the internal, which will then help the body.
So I think what comes to mind a little bit there, again, we can have hours and hours of this conversation, but again, I come up like words pop into my head with this, and it's the idea of there's two sides, because we live in a world of duality, right? So we see this, and the mechanism is allowing, right? Offer no resistance. But why do we offer resistance? We offer resistance to allowing that release or letting go because we're afraid, right? It's fear. So fear and allowing are on two sides, we're on two different legs there, right? They're can be two sides of the same coin. So part of the mechanism is first, like you were talking about, Paul, is the recognizing, okay, what am I afraid of either losing or getting when I release, right? Why perceive the outcome will be when I release? What am I afraid of here? And then allowing ourselves to say, you know what? It's okay because you don't really know what the outcome will be, right? Trusting what that outcome will be and say, you know, when I release my bladder, do I trust that I'll make it all in the toilet? You know, or am I gonna...
Two things. One, I want to add to that, but first,
No, go ahead. Go
my
ahead.
Zen master, we've all heard Dharma here, Dharma there, Dharma everywhere. My Zen master would say it is Dharma here, Dharma there, Dharma in my underwear. And that you're hoping that all the urine goes to the toilet. Remind me of that. But the second thing is, I wanted to like kind of offer my perspective. There's also a third option, and that is that I have spent a lot of time holding on to the harder edges of my martial arts and the abrasiveness of my martial arts because it's what saved me. And so in it being what saved me, it's like I got to hold on to this so that doesn't happen ever again.
You know what saved me? You know what saved me as an infant was teething crackers, but I haven't had to go buy them in years. I'm not that kid anymore. So your argument that it saved you is not accepted by this court. What are your needs now?
To release, and on those regards, is something to the effect of like, I have to release the fact that this is actually serving me because it's
Yes.
Right on.
Well, yes. Yes.
It's introspection, and that's and then that's the internal. It's the introspection with the relationships to yourself and how things are going now. Right?
I think that
you guys know that's the internal martial art. Like that's the definite. That's pretty much like the core line definition of the internals. If I'm hitting it, the relationships between what's going on with and your external environment, and how do you handle. And that acknowledgement right there that this doesn't serve me anymore. That's a.
I just want to say that Nick just educated us all on the actual definition of the internal arts. And then he couldn't help
But I
himself.
want you guys
Yeah,
to
he
tell
couldn't
me
help
wrong.
himself. He then said, if I'm hitting it. I'm like, oh, you were so close. Why does it always have to be hitting it?
Right. And that's maybe what I need to release, is that maybe I know, maybe
No.
I'm speaking better than I realize.
No, that's great. I think that release is an embrace of life. Right? Life is that which flows, and that which is contained or not released is stasis. So that means injury, illness, death, in maybe all at once, maybe in some order, maybe over some time. And so, if we're really proponents of life, we're proponents of that which flows. And if that which flows is impeded in some way, then release is an action that's in alignment with life or flow or Tao. And the trouble is, I have all kinds of reasons to contain it and collect it and stories around that. So it's hard to do. But I think ultimately it's aligning with life to work towards a release. Sorry if that got serious. I apologize.
No,
I have
think
jokes.
Right. And
I
to
have
do
jokes.
that, we need to allow, right? So there's a part of my
Yes.
practice is when I'm doing starting my practice, I have a little mantra. One of the things is saying, I offer no resistance. Right. And right. So offering no resistance to that flow. So if we're like what you were going back to, Stephen, saying that you're releasing, you're not really releasing because you're letting go of the need to release because everything is just flowing through you all the time. You're just a sieve. So, right. But it is that idea of allowing and offering no resistance from the beginning. So there's no need for release. But most of us, we have our moments and we have our lives that we have lived, that there is a lot to release because we have held on and we're afraid to for one reason or another. Or, so it is that idea of just really allowing and offering no resistance to even the process of releasing. And then we are in the flow, like Stephen said, of life.
So I just want
Chris.
to kind of jump in here quick because I really appreciate everything everyone's been saying. And I love the ideas about you have to recognize what you're holding on to and then you have to kind of, okay, I need to adjust this. I need to adjust this. But I think the thing that hasn't really come up yet, and Paul kind of asked, like, how do you release, right? And I think the thing that we've missed so far is you have to practice that. And you have to understand, like, you're going to fail at it first. And there's a number of things that have kind of come into mind as everyone's been talking, but I'll try to find the link and send it. But there's a really good animated YouTube video from years ago now that's like Meditation 101. And the primary lesson of that video is that meditation is an exercise in failure. You're gonna sit down and you're gonna try to let go and empty your mind.
Return.
And you are going to fail at it. And the process of learning meditation and understanding it is just trying to fail at it later and let yourself keep going. And so, yeah, these ideas about, okay, I recognize what I'm holding and now I'm going to release it. And I didn't, I failed. And okay, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to try again. And I think going through that process, if our default is I'm holding on to tension for whatever reason, we have to train ourselves out of that. And you have to be willing to practice it over and over and over again and not think like, oh, I let it go. Now I'm done because I've done this as long as Steve Watson has and I'm the sieve. Like, I need to practice poking the holes and understand that I'm not going to get there all at once.
Absolutely. And I think that's the link to like where the external and internal is, like, because you can feel when you fail something physical, right? And so that practice of like, we're very connected, like, that's why we envision the muscular person when you say strength, like we're connected to that sight and feel. So like when we do the external practices, you can feel the progression, right? You feel your goals, you see the belt, you see and then
you can count the
it's not as
push-ups.
tangible. Right. And it's not as tangible when you're just focusing and practicing meditating. I mean, for me to sit down to meditate, I have to do a bunch of movement first. Like that's how I calm my brain. Like I do forms, I do some other type of set that has a lot of movement before I sit and then think. about like all that stuff going and just let it be. You know what I mean? Like I have to do a lot of movement to get my brain moving in general. Like that, and that's me personally. But I think that connection, like what you're speaking to, that failure aspect of, and I think that's why martial arts is so great, is it like it marries that physical and mental and then that non-tangible stuff together, because like you can feel yourself getting better of doing push-ups. You can feel your kick getting higher. You can see it. You can see the result of not getting hit in the face 16 times. It was only 15 this time, right? That failure teaches you those lessons versus just like people have trouble with just sitting with their feelings. That's uncomfortable. Or sitting and examining, what can I do better for, because it's, in the result, like who's going to get up and do it? Who's going to practice? Like you said,
So
it's
what
not going
is
to be
it?
your mom. And that's what we tell our students, like your mom's not going to practice for you to get better, kid. And
What is
we
it
have to
that?
tell ourselves that.
What is it that we already know that teaches us to fail and to enjoy that and appreciate it? Like, do we have something in our world, our culture, that
Is this
already teaches?
is this a Kempo joke?
Well, the way
Yeah, it sounds like the start of a Kempo joke. I was going to say, finally, the fail, 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 something that Paul's martial history suggests that he could do. You're going to be so good at meditation.
I talk to
But there's that old
when I
adage,
say
pain is a good teacher, but nobody wants to take that lesson, right? So nobody wants to go to the point of pain, and pain doesn't necessarily have to mean physical either, but sometimes pain is sitting with something that you have to fix and you just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Right. Or something that like is going on in your brain. That's the point of failure or
and
pain,
also I'd say
right? So like there's that
the idea of, with I tell my, it's the idea of we're often thinking of perfection instead of progress. So I to speak to you, Stephen, with that is I often tell my students is that, if you are watching a little child, a toddler or a little kid, an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old doing exactly what you're doing right now, how would you treat them with this? Right? Would you be like, you didn't get that right again? What the hell is wrong with you? Right? You wouldn't do that to it. Hopefully not. Right? We're decent people.
Right. Yeah.
So we are, if we understand that we're still toddlers as human beings. We're just bigger and smellier toddlers, right? So as we're doing that, as Chris was saying, you recognize that the fact that I pulled back in again, or I responded again or reacted again to this same stimulus, then we could say, okay, I recognize that. All right, like a puppy, bring it back. It's okay. Come back, come back. Let's try again. Let's try again. Or the child, okay, let's try again, and keep doing it over and over. But to recognize it's about progress and not there's perfection. And the other thing I would say, and I've taught this many times too, is sometimes we don't need to recognize what it is to release it. So I use the analogy, if I'm holding something in my hand really tight, and I say, I need to know what this is before I can let it go. But I can't let it go until I see it. But I need to see it. It's a conundrum, right? It's a dilemma.
It's Schrodinger.
So sometimes the idea is I let it go, and then I get to see what it is afterward. And I say, why have I been holding on to that? It's so easy. All I had to do is do this. Right? So that's another way we can look at this, right? That sometimes just let it go. All I got to do to go to the bathroom, I don't know, maybe I'm drinking a lot of tea, I'm thinking about this, is to just open up the urethra and let it go. I don't need to know what's.
Can we quote you on that, Rich?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's the name of this episode, Opening the Urethra.
Did he say open your third eye? I don't think so. Let me check my notes.
Right? So just open it and let it go, and then we'll get to see the contents, right?
Open your fourth eye.
I don't know. This is getting too serious. We got to lighten it up a little. We got to let go. We got to release.
Well,
you got to release the tension.
On that point, for me, I very frequently, implicitly, consciously, and implicitly offer release to students through humor. And they don't know it yet. They don't understand sort of the philosophy behind it or the curriculum, they just think, oh, this guy's not taking it that seriously, or we're having fun. And I'm like, that's literally me working on getting you to relax and release. People don't tense up when they laugh. And, sort of psychologically, emotionally, mentally, they release as well. And having sort of regular humor in the class is like a deeply important tool, like a pillar of what I do. And I know why I'm doing it. And of course, it's also fun and so fine. But like, it's there's a method to that joy.
Chris, it looked like you had something.
I just wanted to share quickly the Thursday and Friday of this past week. I actually had the opportunity to attend a medical conference on the science of Tai Chi and Qigong, which I
In Boston?
In Boston, yeah.
How cool.
Yeah, great.
And I found it really interesting, and there was a lot of good stuff that came out of it. The most encouraging part for me as a practitioner was just how interested the scientific community is and is continuing to become in the practices that we have. And we as practitioners recognize all these benefits because we've felt them, but now science is really coming to a place where they're backing a lot of that up. But the reason it sprung to mind a moment ago was in our talk about, you need to practice this as a skill, is I want people to recognize that there are scientifically discoverable things happening psychologically, neurologically, and it's not just this idea of, well, I've got some emotional thing that I need to teach myself to let go of. Like there are physiological things happening in your body, and to know that you can retrain that. But again, it's going to take time and practice. But, I just hope the people that end up listening to this or watching this, understand that the medical community, the scientific community is recognizing that, and that it's not just, I have this self-based problem, right? That there are physiological things happening, but that they can be retrained, and science is backing up the fact that Tai Chi and Qigong are really great ways to retrain those responses.
And I do appreciate that because there are other ways besides the magic pill that cures all that people constantly look.
Right.
And it takes work, and it's it takes practice, and it takes some introspection, but it's worth it because then what are you releasing if you do that stuff? You're releasing your bounds, not feeling
And actually at the hospital,
things like that. So I do appreciate that they're doing things like that, and there's research backed, and that's an active thing, because that is very needed. Like, we need to kind of lay off of I'm not saying that the medical technologies have not taken us leaps and bounds, but at the same time, a lot of the stuff that we all know, like, again, I'm preaching to the choir. How many people wouldn't have this thing or that thing or feel this way if they would just maybe do a little bit of what
actually,
Yeah.
the hospital I work at, along the lines with what you said, Chris, they're hiring me in the next week. They're doing this event thing, hospital week, and they hired me to do a bunch of sessions of Tai Chi and meditation. And I'm doing it now, meditation in I work in cardiac rehab sometimes, and they're having me do meditation and cardiac rehab. So, because they're seeing that we're measuring with EKGs as these people are doing their meditation, and we're watching their heart rates go down, right? It's pretty, it's like you said, a physiological response. And, we laugh, it's a physiological response. We smile, right? We verbalize. These are physiological responses. So they're happening on really minute levels, on a cellular level, when we're doing these practices, that there is always a physiological response, because the body hears everything, right? The body responds to everything that's happening in the mind. So yeah, it's really cool that you brought that up, Chris, because that's the part that will get people to start understanding as well. Like, with a little bit, all you got to do is spend 10 hours every day for the next 30, no, but just to practice, just putting in the practice has that, because even if you're not practicing, your body is responding to what you're doing either way. If you're sitting on the couch drinking a beer, watching TV, and eating all this like really damaging foods to your body is responding to that. But if you're
Mhm.
meditating or releasing or doing Tai Chi Chuan or any of these things, your body is also responding all the way to a cellular level, right? On every level of the body. Absolutely. And the
Yeah.
medical community is starting to understand this.
Yeah, and there is a lot of really interesting research going on, but the thing that's striking me about what you're saying, Rich, is the things that your body is listening to and what you do with your mind affects your body, but the reverse is also true, right? The thing that you do with your body, your mind is listening to. And I think
Yes.
too much in our culture, we keep those things separate, right? We think of
Yes.
our mind and our body as two different things, and there's mental health and there's physical health. But the more you get into these practices, and again, the scientific community is starting to really back this up. Exactly what you're saying, Rich, that these things are happening on a cellular level, that it's not mind and body, it's mind body, and they're the same. And the more that we kind of start to understand that and accept that, the better off we're going to be.
My Zen master said that letting go or releasing works the same fundamentally as breathing for humans. It's something that should come natural to us. It's something that we should be able to do. He said, but to the unpracticed, it's similar to going underwater for a long time and holding your breath. And then that first breath, when you come up, that first time, the air hitting your lungs again, it burns. It's painful. The second one, a little less painful. The third one, a little less painful until you regulate and you return back to breath. And I think that I've told my students, release is the same way. Like release, release, release. That first one is like, I don't want to do it, but you get it done. The second one, okay, fine. That first one wasn't that bad. So on and so forth.
A few times a minute, your lungs are practicing gather, release, gather, release, gather, release for your whole time. No matter how much you study martial arts, you're practicing less than your lungs. Like they are incessant students of gather, release in perfect balance. And when you are starved of oxygen, like you're underwater for a while or holding your breath, walking through the smoke of the campfire, and when you take that just before you get to take the breath in, it's the only thing you want. The only thing you want. Your bucket list is gone. The only thing you want is to take a breath. And when you take that breath in, if you hold on to it, like you contain it, you gather it, that will ripen and then it will rot. And the only thing that you will want is to let go of the thing that was the only thing you wanted a moment ago. Right. And then if you are empty of breath for long enough, like you're going to continually, and your lungs don't do that. Right. They take in the most precious thing and then they let it go as easily as you don't let go of everything. Right. And then they gather and they just continually practice that. This is why in traditional Chinese medicine, we understand the lungs to be related to the idea of grief, right? And what the lungs are doing, like 5 or 6 times a minute, or 4, whatever, they're practicing letting go, right? That they're the ones that have learned grief, right? They get it. They are having that practice all the time. And you only lose a grandparent every 20 years and a close friend every 12 years, or like it's not quite as frequent as the lungs.
The other thing that I wanted to say is that a quote from my first martial arts instructor, Mike Whiting, who's no longer with us. Mike, your words live on to this day through your students. So that is wonderful. But he said, a good martial arts instructor will make your technique better, but a great martial arts instructor can make you better.
I love that.
So I don't want this to go on and on. I love what we've got here. Does anybody can we go around the room, do closing thoughts? I gotta thank you guys. I don't want to end this podcast like I normally do, where I thank the viewers and I thank you guys. I love you all so very, very much. I appreciate you all so very, very much. But I want your all's final thoughts to be the last thoughts. So we'll just go around the room and like Nick can go first. We'll do Rich, Steven, and then Chris, and then we'll just close there. Okay. So
I don't know. I guess for me, from a perspective of all, I feel like every person needs an aspect of something that the internal arts offer.
Mm.
When I was like first getting into Qigong or Qi, one of the things that was constantly said is there's no wrong Qigong. What's the
Yes.
best Qigong? The one you do.
Yes.
The best one is the one you do. And it stuck with me because that allowed me then to just, okay, maybe I want to practice it different because this is the reason why I'm practicing. And it was more intentional with my training. And if somebody just maybe kind of took that, what's the best thing to do? Whatever you're doing. Sometimes it needs to be something different if you realize you need it. And I think that's like one of the things that the internal arts really highlights for me. And not that the external doesn't, but the internal for me is a lot of introspection in that way. What is the best thing? Do something, and that's the best thing for you. And that's, if anything, the internal art, like I said, if anything, the internal arts has taught me like that's a big one to make it as that stepping stone to get into something maybe a little bit more, as I would call it, nerdy in the most endearing. Some of the people we're trying to reach in that area, what we think like we want them to get to feel. Maybe we would just want them to get them to swing their arms, and then they realizing swinging their arms also leads to like breathing in this way and then doing this set. Or maybe they just swing their arms and they feel better about it, but they're doing something, right? So like to bridge that, once we find that linkage to the next person, then we help them nerd out even further. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Rich?
That's very cool, Nick. So in this last hour or so, I've gathered so many seeds from all of you, right? Like so many seeds that if I take those and cultivate those and let them release their potential, what those seeds are, it'll lead to me releasing my potential as a human being. And I hope that for anybody who's watching this, beyond just the 5 of us, that you look for the seeds, right? And cultivate those seeds. We don't know what we're going to gather, right? We gather nuts like Stephen, and we gather and we cultivate those, and then they grow into a mighty oak like Stephen, right? But each one of those seeds has a potential to be released. We talked about that containing and release. They each contain this amazing potential. And when we cultivate and gather those through our practice, then we as a human being realize our own potential. What else is it about, right? Because then we can do our good works. Because when we are reaching our potential as a human being, we can do good works, right? We can make it worthwhile for everybody else on this planet. And every other being on this planet. And to me, that's what it's about right there.
Thank you. Stephen? So speaking of seeds and planting seeds, my school is called Someday Farm, and that's exactly why. The seeds need a place to be cultivated and cared for. I'm not so much interested in the harvest as the farm work. And it seems to me that every tree is perfectly a tree. Every hyena is perfectly a hyena. Every cloud is perfectly a cloud for the entirety of its being. And yet, as humans, we seem to have written this code, this other software that deviates from the software that we're born with. And we essentially stop honoring what we were able to perfectly be, which is to be fully human. And it's because we follow these human constructs of, language, society, philosophy, religion, whatever it might be. And I think the internal arts offer a pathway back to something that we were born good at, that we were born as, and every other sentient thing is currently doing. And I think that the remarkably important ingredient to study is joy. So I would remind you to seek joy in your training, in your studying, in your note-taking, in your practice, and seek to spread that joy in your interactions in every day, because that allows you to stay on the journey long enough to return to what you had already been.
Wonderful. Chris?
Well, since I get to go last, I think I get the honor of saying thank you to Paul for putting this together, and thank all of you for being part of this. Like Rich, I'm very happy to have gathered the knowledge from you guys that I can share and help to cultivate myself as we continue. But throughout our discussion, there were a couple of quotes that just kind of came to mind that I'll share. The first, I think, is from Renzo Gracie. And so it's very easy to sort of think of this as pertaining only to martial arts, but I don't think that's true. But the quote itself is, "My opponent is my teacher. My ego is my enemy." I think that's a great one for us to just all have in whatever we're doing. And the second one, I think most of us have heard somewhere along the line, what's the difference between the teacher and the student? And the common answer is practice. But the extension to that quote is, what's the difference between the master and the student? And the answer is, the master has failed more times than the student has tried. And that's one that always sticks with me and I think is a great reminder. So thank you all again. I appreciate all of you and everything you've shared.
Thank you all. Much love, everybody.
Thank you so much.